Cambridge Forum to a program featuring Toni Morrison, presented in association with the Unitarian Universalist Association, which gives the Frederic G. Melcher Book Award annually. Here is the chair of the panel of judges, Dr. Spencer Levan, Dean of Meadville Lombard Theological School, associated with the University of Chicago.
The Frederic G. Melcher Book Award is given annually to the work published in America during the past calendar year, judged to be the most significant contribution to religious liberalism. It is given in the form of a $1,000 cash prize, plus a certificate given in memory of the former Dean of American Publishers and sponsored by the Unitarian Universalist Association. The panel of judges in this year, the book being a book published in 1987, are Cicely Bach, Constance Buchanan, Mary Ann Lash, the Reverend Diane Miller, the Reverend Charles Stephen, Dan Wakefield, and myself. I want to introduce at this time Dr. William Schultz, President of the Unitarian Universalist Association, to present the Melcher Book Award and read the citation to our honored guest tonight, Toni Morrison.
In her novel, Beloved, Toni Morrison takes as the starting point for her compelling study of the human condition an actual historical event of the mid-19th century, the murder by a freed black woman of her own child to prevent the child from being taken into slavery. With rare imaginative power, Beloved explores issues central to our national history and contemporary lives: love, death, justice, liberation, and slavery. A work that functions at many levels, the novel is a study of female identity and motherhood, particularly of a black woman's emergence from enslavement and her coming to selfhood, of the black community in its struggle to survive oppression and construct a tradition of hope, and of the white community viewed from the perspective of those who suffered the terrorism of its racial bigotry. In and through all of its themes, Beloved is a reconstruction of the stark reality and meaning of slavery. Morrison shows us that this pernicious institution not only imposed suffering and death, but also obliterated for black people all other institutions. Slavery destroyed the possibility of an institutional basis for black people's lives, for physical integrity, identities, love, families, beliefs, work, and destinies. In the face of this destruction, blacks have individually and collectively found the will to live and to act. Morrison has written a novel rich with theological insight. The Melcher Book Award Committee is pleased to honor Toni Morrison, holder of the Schweitzer Chair at the State University of New York at Albany, as recipient of the 1988 Frederic G. Melcher Book Award for this distinguished piece of fiction.
Thank you. I remember going to speak maybe last year or 2 years ago on campus and was introduced by the president of the university. And when he saw the number of people who had come to hear myself and 2 or 3 other people who were on the panel, he was astonished, and he said, "This is almost like hockey crowd." I'm very grateful to the Cambridge Forum and, of course, to the Unitarian Universalist Association, and, of course, especially to the Melcher Book Award Committee for this signal honor of my work. I know the criteria for this award are different from commercial considerations and criteria that suggest that the book, like all of the other awards they have given for the past 25 years, has an alternate parallel value. But it's a value that for me is in many ways superior to other kinds. And when I was notified that I had been chosen, I began to think, well, they weren't really thoughts, they were just sort of ruminations about value and about worth and the difference. And when a writer begins to think about value and worth, it usually means that you're dwelling on a moment after publication, after the work is done, a period which I can call after beloved now. It's that post-publication period when you can assess what you've done, what was done as well as why. And then you wonder what you can't wonder when you start it, which is, what is it for? What has all that been about? 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. I mean to say, outside its novelistic, outside its literary, outside its job of work, even outside the reader confronting the page transfiguration. Outside of that, what is it for? I mean to say, it's almost as though the novel or a novel or the work substitutes for something. That the novel exists instead of something else. And to find out what it is that it exists instead of, you have to think about what drove you, or what drove me to do it. That primary conviction that one has, that this is absolutely necessary, and a secondary certainty when one begins that I alone am the one who can do it. How delusional is that feeling? Is it the necessary fiction that one needs to construct in order to just do the work that takes so long? The work that you have to feel that without readers, without publishers, would you have been equally as driven? And my answer is always, oh yes, yes, yes. The question I'm putting to myself now is why? Why? Well, it did become a little bit more clear to me after Beloved, a year later, which is around now, what perhaps in very personal terms it substituted for. There is no place here where I can go or where you can go and think about or not think about or summon the presences of or recollect the absences of slaves, or just one. Something that reminds us of the ones who made the journey and those who did not make it. There is no suitable memorial or plaque or wreath or wall or park or skyscraper lobby. There's no 300-foot tower. There's no small bench by the road. There is not even a tree scored and initialed that I can visit, or you can visit, in Charleston, or Savannah, or New York, or Providence, or the Ohio River, or better still, on the banks of the Mississippi. And because such a place doesn't exist that I know of, the book had to. But I didn't know that before or while I wrote it. So now I can see what I was doing on the last page. Well, yes, I was finishing the story. And I was also transfiguring and disseminating the haunting with which the book begins. Yes, I was doing that, but I was doing something more. I think I was pleading. I think I was pleading for that wall, or that bench, or that tower, or that tree. When I wrote the final words, there is a loneliness that can be rocked, arms crossed, knees drawn up, holding on. This motion, unlike a ship's, smooths and contains the rocker. It's an inside kind, wrapped tight like skin. Then there's a loneliness that roams. No rocking can hold it down. It's alive on its own, a dry and spreading thing that makes the sound of one's own feet going seem to come from a far-off place. Everybody knew what she was called, but nobody anywhere knew her name. Disremembered and unaccounted for, she can't be lost because no one is looking for her. And even if they were, how can they call her if they don't know her name? Although she has claim, she is not claimed. In the place where long grass opens, the girl who waited to be loved and cry shame erupts into her separate parts to make it easy for the chewing laughter to swallow her all away. It was not a story to pass on. They forgot her like a bad dream after they made up their tales and shaped and decorated them. Those that saw her that day on the porch quickly and deliberately forgot her. It took longer for those who had spoken to her, lived with her, fallen in love with her, to forget. And they realized they couldn't remember or repeat a single thing she'd said, and began to believe that other than what they themselves were thinking, she hadn't said anything at all. So in the end, they forgot her too. Remembering seemed unwise. They never knew where or why she crouched, or whose was the underwater face she needed like that. Where the memory of the smile under her chin might have been, and was not, a latch latched, and lichen attached, its apple green bloom to the metal. What made her think her fingernails could open locks the rain rained on? It was not a story to pass on, so they forgot her, like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. Occasionally, however, the rustle of a skirt hushes when they wake, and the knuckles brushing a cheek in sleep seem to belong to the sleeper. Sometimes the photograph of a close friend or relative looked at too long shifts, and something more familiar than the dear face itself moves there. They can touch it,
if they like, but don't, because they know things will never be the same if they do. This is not a story to pass on. Down by the stream in back of 124, her footprints come and go, come and go. They are so familiar. Should a child, an adult, place his feet in them, they'll fit. Take them out, and they disappear again as though nobody ever walked there. By and by, all trace is gone. And what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what it is down there. The rest is weather, not the breath of the disremembered and unaccounted for, but wind in the eaves, or spring ice thawing too quickly. Just weather, certainly no clamor for a kiss, beloved. Thank you.
The forum is open for your questions and comments. We have a microphone here at the center of the meeting house, and I don't know how you're going to manage to reach it, but you're free to line up if you can do it.
After reading your books, I always feel so drained. I feel I see my mother there, I see my grandmother there, I see my aunts there, and after I read it, I just feel as though, wow, she's taken so much from me and put it on paper, and now I've read it, and it's like, it's absolutely overwhelming. I'm wondering, for you as a writer, after you finish such a work, do you feel drained? I mean, is it something that you almost, is it something that you feel that you just have to do, or how do you feel after you finish such a work as this?
The draining, you should only feel for a while. You know, don't you feel nurtured and full later on?
I'm glad that it's here on paper, and I'm great. I feel very thankful to you for having put it down on paper so that I can see it, of course. But I guess it's just so rare that something of my history is so richly put on paper. I mean, it's almost priceless, and I'm just wondering how you feel after you've written it.
Well, this book was difficult for me because I had done different things with different books and posed certain kinds of obstacles for myself that were, you know, technical and so on, so I could stay interested in it. In a way other than how does it all turn out, you know, the other things, the strategies were provocative, you know, to see if I could show out here and show off there and please myself there and flop here or whatever. But anyway, the process is extremely interesting to me, and I learned from one book to the next a lot about how to do certain things. What was interesting to me about Beloved was that there was almost nothing that I knew that I seemed sure of, nothing I could really use. Of all the books have been different for me, but Beloved was like I had never written a book before. It was brand new. And I knew that I was in the company of people whom I absolutely adored in a situation that I absolutely abhorred. And to stay in that company like that and listen to all of that or imagine that or invent that or not write this was, you know, draining is a word. It was very different, exhausting. And I thought more than I've ever thought about any book. I cannot do this book. I thought that a lot. And I stopped for long periods of time and said, I know why I've never read a book like this, because nobody, who can write this? So, but then I would, suddenly I decided that was a very self-regarding thing to do. I mean, who did I think I was after all? When those people had lived that life. I mean, this was not a Disney movie. This was a very small, tiny little part of what some of that life had been. The little I knew about my own family's life was enough, where those people were in genuinely life-threatening circumstances. So if all I had to do was sit in a room and look at paper and imagine it, it seemed a little vain, adolescent, not quite grown up, for me to complain about the difficulty of that work. And then also I was, pricked by the notion that maybe the institution, as long as it lasted, as ad hoc and as organized as it was, maybe it was beyond art. And that depressed me so much that I would, just do some more. You need all you can get to do it anyway. And if you're doing something that you are fearful of, because there's a lot of fear of failing in this book, of not doing justice. I don't mean, I can write anything, but I didn't mean that, Part of what I said earlier when I was before these questions was about what is the worth of the whole thing. What do you, aside from the egocentric stuff, what is it about? And that kept me strong. Yes.
In high school, and seniors in high school, we have to read Song of Solomon. And my teacher gave us a test on it, and obviously, and he gave us, one of the questions on the test was, what do you think Toni Morrison would think of her idea of flying in the book Song of Solomon? And since I'm here, I decided, hey, well, I'll ask you.
What was the question? What would Toni Morrison what?
What was the meaning of flying?
What did I mean by
Yes.
using that? Right. Sure, that's a good question. Good question. I meant to suggest a way in which a folk tale that I knew about in the black culture, about the ability of black people to fly, used to be able to fly, literally fly. I wanted to take that little given and to explore it in contemporary terms. Not as the myth as translated by Icarus, for example. That sort of ambition and the Father and the Son and the melting and don't go too high because you drop dead. Not that. But what it may have been in the culture itself, without any Eurocentric reference. And that story was my reading of that. So I have a man who learns something important. He learns what to me was like flying. Flying is a gesture in which you can only do it if you know an awful lot about yourself. If you trust an element that is untrustworthy. If you risk a lot. And if you have a lot of faith, you might be able to do it. Well, the point is that at the end, he has that combination of risk and commitment and love and self-knowledge and a sacrificial. He's willing to risk something for somebody whom he loves more than himself. And that, to me, was a very interesting constellation of characteristics that were parallel to what it would take to fly. So outside, from within a black tale or conviction, I was able to find a paradigm for a contemporary story about the education of this young middle-class man. Did you write that down on your answer?
Times are becoming more and more depressing, especially with this election coming up. What do you do to, like, maintain hope?
Well, I tell you something. You're right. It's very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. It's extremely depressing, and it's really not funny. On the other hand, you really have to, it's like, you know, a few years ago when there was such a buildup of nuclear weapons and it was just getting like, everybody was armed to the teeth and it was like awful. One realized that somebody had imagined that. And it lived. So the problem then seemed to be to unimagine it. Unimagine it. What would it be like if it didn't exist? What would it be like? In all of its details, in every way. What would it be like if you had it like you wanted it? What would it be? Can you really imagine living in a world without nuclear weapons? It's very difficult to do. What would you do differently? Where would you live? How would your life change? Or without all sorts of things? Well, that has got to be imagined in order to prevent the paralysis. Because if we're paralyzed because it's unworkable, unthinkable, non-political, we won't move. That's one thing. The second thing is there are things to do. They are not, if we think in huge numbers about how to save the continent, we're already whipped. But if you think in terms of one's, small things, 6 people, 1 person, 1 room, 1 backyard, not the beach, the highway, what are you doing? And then it works. And then you know that you have imagined a world in which you can live. It may be small as your room, but you have imagined it, and then you are in control. That's not hope, that's real work. And that's what's important, that people realize how valuable life is. And simply exercise the one thing that human beings have, which is the ability to imagine what it would be like if you had it the way it was supposed to be. Then what would you do? What color would you paint your walls? And then paint them.
Cambridge Forum has presented Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Toni Morrison speaking on the topic of her book, Beloved. An audio cassette of this forum is available by sending $10 to Cambridge Forum, number 3 Church Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 02138. Cambridge Forum is a program of the Social Responsibility Committee of the First Parish in Cambridge. The director of the forum is Reverend Herbert Vedder. The producer is David LaValle. Beloved was produced in association with WGBH Boston. Cambridge Forum is made possible in part by the Unitarian Universalist Congregations of North America.